Okay, in class, we have been starting our unit on memo writing. And one of the things I wanted to focus upon as I try to get my materials in order, here we go, very quickly looking at things that we in the face to face class talked about. And that brings me to a quick screenshot of the memo rubric, which is embedded in the links. And it talks about going 1 through 10 here. The 10 things that the memo would be graded on or evaluated on. And I'm looking here at the first here, we have to have the correct heading. Second, we need the subject to be professional as if it were going to be filed. Third, we need the very first paragraph to state a problem which is going to be shared. That is also what number 6 is going to say here. I want to emphasize that. As we look at the next example here, I want to keep that in mind. A professional tone. Number 4, we need our language not to offend people, not to be sarcastic or cut people short. I don't want to go on and be wordy in number 5. I don't want to unnecessarily tell a story, go off on a tangent. Like I said, 6, that problem needs to be shared. The reader in the first paragraph needs to identify that this is a problem that affects them. They're involved, in which case a solution is in their best interest. I don't do that if I scare them or if I somehow or other don't make it relevant. We'll talk about that. Number 7, once I establish that relevance, I need to put an action step what everybody is going to do to solve the problem. In other words, the reader has to identify this as something that affects them and push them into part of the solution. If it doesn't affect me, I don't care about it. I'm not involved. If I'm afraid of what I read in the first 2 sentences, I immediately am lost. I'm no longer productive. I'm concerned about other things beyond the solution in those action steps. I don't ever want to threaten or punish somebody, certainly not fire somebody in a memo. Those are personal, individual matters that need to be dealt with privately. Consequences should come at the end. I don't want to lead off with the idea that somebody's going to be fired, somebody's going to be laid off or something like that, penalized one way or another, because again, that reader will then lose the rest of my message. And finally, at the end, I want to think about how they can contact me further. Now, for some reason in my slide here, I couldn't center this as well as I'd like, but in your materials embedded, something called, I believe it's the wrong memo. And I put it there, and what I found on Tuesday is that while this works very well in a face-to-face class, I imagine it comes across as puzzling online or in a blended class. So what I have, looking at that rubric or applying that rubric, is what I put my name on here as a poorly written memo. I don't usually tell the students that in class. I let them tell me what's wrong with it. But it occurs to me, especially if I were taking this online and by myself, maybe it wouldn't be so obvious. So let's look at it. It has a heading to it. Memo is at the top. I always like that at the top so that it's clear what it is, why it's relevant. Date, to, from the sender. And the subject here is poor grades. That means that my memo ought to, needs to, necessarily has to do something to address poor performance, poor grades, whatever that would be. Let's see if that holds up. My first paragraph, if I look at number 6 and I think number 3 on the rubric above, is supposed to have a shared problem. Due to the poor grades and lousy attendance this class has shown, I plan to eliminate half the class before the break. Anyone with more than 3 absences as of Friday will be dropped. That is very much made. I've been using this for several years. It has nothing specific to do with this class. But when I show it in class, there's two reactions. I can't think of a third. The first, for most of the students, is to look at the first sentence, maybe the first two, and realize their attendance is good, their grades have been fine, and they've already checked out. This doesn't pertain to me, this isn't my problem. The other response looking at this is the student that immediately begins to count how many absences they've had and immediately starts to look at this as a warning that they're about to be penalized for something. Whatever follows from the rest of my document is lost on those two kinds of students. Very few people are still hanging on to figure out what the rest of this says. By now, they've already recognized this is poorly written, and they're certainly not going to help me do anything. To this point, I've done nothing involving the subject to address poor grades. I have used a poor professional tone here. Words like lousy, eliminate, maybe poor. Those are pretty loaded words. Again, I'm trying to keep an even ship. If you look at this as a student in this class, you should look at yourself as somebody who's going to be a leader at some point. This clearly does not establish the kind of workplace, the kind of productive group of people that I think any of us really want to work in, and certainly not something we want to be the leader of. It's an ineffective climate. And that's all from the first 2.5 lines. Let's go into the second paragraph. This is where I should have action steps. Now that I've established that this is a problem that affects us all, it needs to be addressed for all of us to benefit. The second paragraph should provide the action steps that tell us what we're going to do going forward. How do we do? I also have found graffiti on the desks in the middle of the room. Nobody will get a passing grade or any credit for this until I am told exactly who's responsible for this. The college cannot be expected to assume the cost for damaged property. Once the student is pointed out by their classmates, that student will be removed and they will not get a high school diploma. A lot of threatening going on in that. We're also apparently trying to manage a classroom in which we're encouraging students to turn each other in, maybe for small things. I, again, have done nothing to relate the first paragraph to the second. I didn't establish a problem in the first paragraph, so I'm left basically stomping and having a tantrum in my second paragraph. Nothing to address poor grades, nothing that relates to poor grades. Graffiti is obviously an additional added on issue that may or may not have anything to do with this particular group. But when I start talking about nobody will get a passing grade, they will not get a high school diploma, I have again damaged any productivity that the learning atmosphere or the workplace is going to have. That's something that poor managers do. I don't think this is the kind of environment that any of us would want to work in, and I certainly don't think we'd want to supervise or manage a dysfunctional type of climate where we're encouraging coworkers to turn on each other. Finally, I get to my third paragraph. I'm sure that you will agree that we need better control of the classroom, and I know that you will be of help in singling out the guilty classmates. Thank you for your help, and I wish you a blessed holiday. Again, in class, people kind of jump on this. A student on Tuesday said he was surprised with this memo. And what surprised was, I think he was being diplomatic. The surprise was that the person writing it would naturally presume or buddy up to the reader in that last paragraph. I'm sure I can count on you to be with me on this. I'm sure you'll help me, so on and so forth. There's no such agreement from a student that feels like they've been threatened or bullied or something like that. Um, in the last line, another student jumped on right away. Thank you for your help, and I wish you a blessed holiday. There's that professional tone again. I'm being sarcastic. I'm trying to be funny. It doesn't come across in the memo that you're trying to amuse. This is why this particular memo fails. I wanted to make sure that I put that together, and I will in the future have this in the unit. It's certainly what we discussed during class, but I want to make sure that for those taking this outside the classroom, that we have an obvious point to be made with this memo. And as you read the wrong memo with Mr. Slate, I want you to reflect in the same way, go through and see how it holds up, 1 through 10 on our rubric. Thank you.